The night was a river of dark, quiet asphalt, flowing through the sleeping heart of Pittsburgh. It was late, the kind of late where the city holds its breath, waiting for the dawn. Inside a nondescript black sedan, the only sounds were the soft hiss of tires on the pavement and the low hum of the engine. Behind the wheel, Dr. Aris Thorne was a study in calm, her mind unwinding from the sharp focus of a 12-hour emergency management summit. As a senior strategic analyst for a federal agency that handled national crises, her days were a cascade of high-stakes, logistics, and impossible decisions. Tonight, all she wanted was the quiet comfort of home. She wasn't speeding. Her hands rested lightly on the wheel, her path steady. But in the deep shadows of an overpass, another man was watching. His world a cramped patrol car smelling of stale coffee and simmering boredom. Officer Frank Miller had been on the force for 15 years. A tenure that had slowly ground down his patience and replaced it with a rigid, unyielding certainty. To him, the world was simple. There were those who obeyed, and those who needed to be taught a lesson. He saw the sedan's out-of-state plates and a flicker of something, a phantom weave so slight it might have been a trick of the light was all the reason he needed. The boredom vanished, replaced by a familiar surge of purpose. He threw his car into gear, and the night shattered into strobing red and blue dot in her rearview mirror. Aris saw the lights bloom. A flicker of surprise, nothing more. Years of training in high-pressure environments had forged an unshakable composure. Signaled, pulled over smoothly to the shoulder, and killed the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, punctuated by the slam of a car door. She watched the approaching figure in her side mirror a tall, broad silhouette, its movements sharp and deliberate, his hand resting casually, professionally on the grip of his sidearm. He didn't approach the passenger side as protocol often suggested for officer safety. He came straight to her window, his shadow falling over her. He rapped twice on the glass with his knuckle. Aris lowered the window halfway, the cool night air rushing in. "License and registration," he said, his voice flat, devoid of any greeting. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, landing directly on her face, pinning her in its glare. "Good evening, Officer," Aris replied, her tone even. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel. "May I ask the reason for the stop?" The light didn't waver. "You were weaving in your lane back there. Looked unsteady. I need to see your documents." Aris raised a single questioning eyebrow. "I can assure you I wasn't." She made no sudden moves, reaching slowly and deliberately for the glove compartment. As she retrieved her wallet and the vehicle's papers, she stated plainly, "This is a federally registered vehicle. I'm a federal employee on official business." He took the documents, his gaze barely flickering over her credentials. A smirk touched the corner of his mouth. "Federal, huh? Doesn't make you special. Law's the same for everyone." "I never suggested it wasn't," she said, her patience a thin, strong wire. His tone sharpened, the pretense of a routine stop evaporating. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am." Aris blinked, the request so disproportionate to the situation that it took her a moment to process. "Excuse me, on what grounds?" "I said, step out of the car, okay? I'm going to administer a field sobriety test." A knot tightened in her stomach. This was no longer about a supposed traffic violation. It was about control. Her mind, trained to assess threats and de-escalate, ran through a dozen scenarios in a split second. She knew that arguing would only feed his aggression, a compliance. Without question felt like surrender to an injustice. She made a choice. With a subtle movement of her thumb, she navigated to her phone's camera, propped it discreetly against the center console, and hit record. "Just so we are clear, officer," she said, her voice remaining perfectly level, "I am documenting this interaction from this point forward." For the first time, a flicker of hesitation crossed Officer Miller's face. His eyes darted toward the dim glow of the phone screen. But his pride, a stubborn and well-fed beast, shoved the doubt aside. He'd come too far to back down now. He reached down and yanked her car door open himself. Out now. Aris Thorne stepped out of the car. Sue stood tall, not with aggression, but with an unshakable dignity. She wasn't a soldier in uniform, but she carried an authority that came from a lifetime of responsibility of being the calmest person in rooms on fire. Miller, for the first time, seemed to truly see the impeccable posture, the intelligent, unwavering gaze. A small, nagging voice whispered in his mind, "Who is this woman?" But it was too late. He was committed under the cold orange glare of the streetlights. He forced her through the charade of a sobriety test. She walked the imaginary line with perfect balance, her movements precise. She recited the alphabet without a hint of a slur. She was flawless, defeated but unwilling to admit it. Miller retreated to his patrol car and wrote her a ticket for failure to maintain lane. He handed it to her with a dismissive air, a final, petty assertion of his power. Aris took the slip, of paper without a word, her expression unreadable. She got back in her car, her hands steady, and drove away into the night. The recording of the entire encounter safely stored on her phone. Officer Frank Miller watched her taillights disappear, a smug sense of victory settling over him. Had no idea that he hadn't just written a ticket. He had signed a summons to a reckoning he was utterly unprepared for. Back at the precinct, Miller logged the stop with practiced indifference. He dropped his body cam into its charging dock, the footage an unexamined digital ghost. In the break room the next day, he spun the story for laughs. "You should have seen this one," he told his colleague Rousseau, "some big shot in a government car. Thought her ID was a get-out-of-jail-free card." Rousseau sipped his coffee. Government? What agency? Didn't care. Name was Thorne. Dr. Aris Thorne. Rousseau froze his mug halfway to his lips. His face paled. Wait. Dr. Aris Thorne, the one from FEMA. The woman who coordinated the national response during the hurricane last year. I saw her on the news for a week straight. Call her the architect inside the agency. She's not just some bureaucrat, Frank. She's the real deal. Miller just shrugged, a wave of bravado washing over this sudden cold spike of unease. Doesn't matter who she is. On my road, I'm the law. But the certainty in his own voice sounded hollow, even to him. Meanwhile, Aris Thorne was not thinking about revenge. She was thinking about responsibility. In her quiet office, surrounded by maps and contingency plans, she replayed the video. She saw the implicit threat in his posture, heard the undisguised contempt in his voice, and understood how easily it could have spiraled. This wasn't about her wounded pride. It was about the principle. She thought of the junior analysts she mentored, the countless ordinary people who would have been too intimidated, too frightened to do anything but endure the humiliation. Authority without accountability was a poison. And she had just been served a dose. She didn't call the mayor or leak the video to the press. Her methods were more precise. She forwarded the video to her agency's legal counsel with a detailed, factual report. She then contacted a private attorney, Marcus Finch, a man known for his sharp intellect and his intolerance for bullies. "You're sure you want to pursue this, Aris?" Finch asked over the phone. "Civil rights complaint against a police officer is a messy public fight." "I manage crisis zones for a living, Marcus," she replied, her voice firm. "This is not a crisis. This is a correction." His behavior was not just unprofessional. It was an abuse of the trust we place in law enforcement. Let the facts speak for themselves. Within a week, a formal complaint was filed. Unlawful detainment, intimidation, abuse of power. When the official summons arrived at the precinct, it landed on the desk of Captain Eva Rostova, a woman with steel in her spine and no patience for cowboys. She called Officer Miller into her office and closed the door. The blinds were shut. "Frank," she began, her voice low and dangerous. "Tell me about the traffic stop on Dr. Aris Thorne." Miller, still clinging to his self-righteousness, recounted his version. "She had an attitude, Captain. Questioned my authority." Rostova leaned forward, her eyes narrowed. "Dr. Thorne is one of the most respected public servants in this country. Her record is flawless. She briefs congressional committees and has the direct line of a dozen senators. And you, on a slow Wednesday night, decided she was a drunk driver because of a phantom weave." She slid a tablet across the desk. "This is the video from her phone. It just became evidence. Your body cam footage confirms her version. Didn't just make a bad stop. Frank, you picked a fight with a woman who can dismantle your career with a handful of quiet phone calls. But she's not doing that. She's taking you to court. She wants this on the public record." For the first time, the swagger drained completely from Frank Miller, replaced by the cold, heavy dread of consequence. The day of the trial, the courtroom was a hushed theater of anticipation. Miller sat beside his lawyer, his face a stony mask. That couldn't quite hide the tension in his jaw. Then the doors opened, and Dr. Aris Thorne walked in. She wasn't wearing a uniform decorated with medals, but her presence commanded the room all the same. She wore a simple, perfectly tailored dark gray suit, the armor of a professional who had come not to battle, but to present the truth. She walked with a quiet, unshakable confidence that silenced the last whispers in the room. When she took the stand, her voice was as clear and steady as it had been on the side of the road. She recounted the events without melodrama or anger, simply laying out the facts. Then her lawyer, Marcus Finch, played the videos. First, her phone recording. Then, Miller's body cam footage. The jury saw it all. Her calm, respectful questions met with his escalating aggression. They saw his hand hover near his gun. They saw him yank her door open. Finch paused the body cam footage at the exact moment. Miller smirked, a fleeting expression of dominance just before he escalated the encounter. The image hung in the silent courtroom, more damning than any testimony. During cross-examination, Miller's lawyer tried to paint Aris as arrogant. "Dr. Thorne, don't you think an officer in a dangerous job deserves a little latitude? Shouldn't you have simply complied without question?" Aris looked directly at the jury. "I believe that authority, whether it's a badge, a title, or a position, is not a shield to hide behind. It is a responsibility. I complied with every lawful order. I did not, however, surrender my right to be treated with basic human dignity. Experience has taught me that in a tense situation, composure is safety. I recorded the event because that same experience has taught me that silence rarely protects the innocent." The argument was over before the verdict was read. The jury found in her favor, ruling that Officer Miller had violated her constitutional rights. The judgment included a financial penalty, but more importantly, a permanent mark on his public record and a mandated review of the department's training policies. Aris Thorne didn't smile. She simply gave a slow, single nod. It was done. Weeks later, the fallout for Miller was severe. A lengthy suspension, a permanent desk assignment, and the open disdain of his colleagues, who now saw him not as a tough cop, but as a liability. 2 months later, Dr. Aris Thorne stood at a podium, not in a courtroom, but in a university auditorium, addressing a new generation of public policy students. "Power is a tool," she said, her voice resonating with quiet authority. "You can use it to build, to protect, to serve. Or you can use it as a club. But you must remember that the uniform you may one day wear, the title you will earn, the office you will hold, none of it makes you infallible. It makes you accountable." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the young, eager faces. "When you encounter someone who has forgotten that, someone who uses their power to diminish others, you will have a choice. You can be silent, you can be angry, or you can be calm, you can be factual, and you can be firm. You can hold the line, not with force, but with integrity. Because true strength isn't about who can shout the loudest. It's about who has the courage to stand for what is right, especially when they are standing alone in the dark on the side of a lonely road.